So, before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to put some feelers out there. I'm always looking for new people to have conversations with, people that can share their story or their unique perspective with us that we can learn from. I've learned that a lot of people don't consider themselves as having a unique perspective or being diverse, but the whole point of this podcast and this space is to recognize that everyone has a different story and that their perspective and beliefs and the way they move in the world is because of the experiences that they've had. And so I would invite each of you to just take some time and think about your own story, and if that's something that you would be interested in sharing, and or if you have people in your life that you feel like would be great people to have on the show, and I would love to hear from you, so reach out. But with that, today we are sitting with Mia. Mia is blind, and she's an advocate for disability awareness and goes to school at BYU, lives independently, and there were a lot of things that were surprising to me in regards to her living her life in a way that, and with resources that give her quite a bit of independence, which is really exciting to hear. So with that, let's sit with Mia. Why don't you tell listeners a little bit about you and a little bit about the background of your story and your life, and then we'll jump into some of those questions that we've talked about that can help us understand the world that you navigate a little bit better.
So I was born in Heber, so I grew up in the same house, and just I loved being able to grow up that small town and stay in the same place and make a lot of friends there. And I was born with a condition that's hereditary, and it's just the luck of the draw. My parents had certain genes that made it so that I had a condition called Leber's congenital amaurosis, or LCA for short. I was born the youngest of 5 kids, and my brother also blind. And so by the time I was born, my mom had an idea of what she was getting into and an idea of what was going to be the best way for me to go up and learn. And so I went to public school, and I always loved school. I loved learning. And I started participating in plays and doing a lot of singing when I was about 8. And that's been something that I've loved my entire life. I did a lot of things in high school. I did choir and different plays. And I also always have loved to read and write. And so I did a lot of that. And I just came back from my first year at BYU. That's the cliff notes of my life.
Amazing. No, it's amazing. I'm really curious if your parents knew that of the genes that they carried, if they have other family members that were also born with that same diagnosis, or if it was a shock when your brother was born.
Oh, they had no idea. For the first couple of, and maybe even months from brother, the doctors couldn't figure out what it was. And I think it was really scary for them because they weren't sure what was causing the loss of eyesight. They couldn't know if something was wrong, developmentally, or if he was going to be okay. Just because really the way that the genes that they combined, I think it was a recessive gene for both of them. And so they had never seen it before in their families. It just was big shock to them. So yeah, out of the blue, but.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in. Okay, I want to hear a little bit about one of the things I'm really curious about is I think probably a lot of people, when they think about being blind, they think a lot of the things that you can't do. And life story that you just shared sounds very normal in plays, doing music, doing things you love, loving school, reading, going to BYU. I'm really curious, what are some things that would surprise listeners about your life?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh my goodness. Yes. And I do have a lot of people say, I can't imagine what it would be like. Obviously, there are challenges, but everybody has challenges.
Yeah,
But
totally.
yes, to respond to your question, I don't know. I think people would be surprised that I live alone when I'm at college. They always ask me whether I drive down or whether I live with parents still and I just drive down to college. But I actually live in the dorms there, and I navigate college largely by myself, which I think surprises people. They just don't expect it. And
Yeah.
but I enjoy living alone. I was actually scared to do it because
Okay.
a lot of people, I don't know, they not any ill intention, but they would just be like, "How are you gonna do that?" And I'd be like, "Gosh, I don't know." And so I'm nervous. Yeah. But it
Yeah.
was something that I felt like really made me realize like what I was capable of and that it was
Mhm.
okay to live alone and be a grown up. So I think that surprises people sometimes.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. When you say live alone, though, did you still have a roommate?
Oh yes, I did. I did have a roommate. There were 6 girls in my apartment. So
Phone.
I did I guess I didn't
Tell us what's
technically
like a
no,
Yes, no, I know what you mean.
really
I just
private.
was curious. Tell us a little bit about what a day in
Mhm.
the life means, because when you say I largely can do that on my own, tell us how. What are some of those things about your daily life that you are doing to live on your own? And you might say, just like what everyone else does. But are there any, I don't know, tools or devices that help you navigate that living alone?
Absolutely, yeah. So, it's actually fairly difficult to navigate BYU as a blind person just because there are so many buildings that get to all your classes, and so I have to, write route exactly, and so I'll write down, like, instructions for myself. I'll go through I have an
Mhm.
instructor, who helps me so basically just figuring out routes to place. So the
Okay.
instructions are really detailed that I write down, and it's funny. It'll just be like, until you hear the sound of a stream, and then turn right on the second intersecting sidewalk, and wait, the ground changes. And it's just funny the things that you have to
Yeah.
notice as a blind person. So,
Yeah,
um,
things we don't even think about. I'm just thinking it's really hard even for me to navigate campus.
yeah,
So then to
right.
add
Like,
in like 100 people around you, because in between classes it's crazy.
yeah, and there can be faults with the written route because if I go off course, I have to be like, okay, new route. Think about
Yeah.
how to get to my class, this different area. And so that can
Yeah.
be it's challenge, but it's honestly like it's very rewarding to get to a class. I feel like most people do nothing, but I feel like I've just
Yeah.
won something.
Huge wins all day, every day.
Exactly. It's the little things. It's just like I made it to my class. But something else that I use that's really helpful, there's this app called Voice Vista, and basically what it does is that it's like a GPS and it'll tell you like, oh, you're on the right track. And so it's really helpful when I am lost in campus and I don't know where I am. Then I can open up Voice Vista and it'll say, the building is 70 feet ahead. And then it'll make the noise as to which direction to go.
So do you have headphones in most of the day? Is that what you're listening to things on?
Yeah, I do. I usually have I actually use the I don't know if you've heard of the Meta glasses. They
Yeah.
are extremely helpful because they are bone conduction headphones. So they my ears open to be able to hear, but they also make it so that other people don't have to hear a phone making noises at me all day.
Yeah.
And but another thing is that you can take pictures with the glasses. You can be like, "Hey, Meta, take a picture," and it'll describe it for you what you're
Mhm.
looking at. And it's very cool. And it's
Wow.
obviously still like it's pretty flawed, but it has so much potential
Yeah.
to help people. So I really like that.
That's amazing. Is that really expensive? I've never looked into it. I'm just wondering if it's crazy. Does insurance help with stuff like that? I'm always curious about cost of things that
Absolutely.
incredibly increase the quality of your life.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I don't think they're too expensive, but to your point, it is very expensive to get all of the different devices. And honestly, I think that's one of the flaws of living as a blind person and a disabled person in general is that things that we pricey for because they can get away with it because they're
Mhm.
selling to a more limited clientele. But it does feel a little bit unfair where it's okay, we actually need like these
Yeah.
devices and they're just super expensive. But the government has a program that helps with a little bit. It can be difficult, but it is helpful.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I've heard that from a couple other people that I've talked to with someone that uses a wheelchair and other things.
Mhm.
Where yeah, it just adds up so fast, and you really do need those things on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, what are some other tools or devices that help you navigate the world? Anything from like more like things you're using for school, technology, or I don't know if there's anything that helps in like from a social perspective. Anyway, any other tools or devices you use that might be interesting for us to learn about? Absolutely. So my favorite one is it's called a Braille Sense. It's basically like a tablet. So it has access to the internet and email and a word processor and books. And so it has access to all of those things. But what it does is it can everything from the internet or an email or anything that I just mentioned into Braille so that I can read it. Then if I were to send somebody an email, I would type it in Braille. And when I send it over to them, it automatically translates so that they can read it, what I'm writing. It's really incredible.
Wow.
And I love it so much. So is that what you've been using as we've communicated? Yes, I text you with it. So what it also can do is it can connect to my phone. And so it will basically translate everything on my phone into Braille and then back to print is what I don't know, like the letters that,
Yeah.
that people are able to read. So it's very handy. I love it. I was going to say communicating with you has been seamless. And so I've been really
Oh,
curious about the technology that you use. I think it's awesome.
absolutely.
It's very cool, and I think a lot of people have different preferences. My brother, for example, he really loves voiceover on the phone, basically just like
Mm.
a text and speech. It will tell you verbally everything that's on the screen. Then he can voice text and dictate and all that. I don't love it because having my phone up to my ear all day and like trying to listen, but I also just not, I like to read and write. I'm much faster with that than with
Mm.
dictating or listening to things. That's cool. There's
Yeah.
options for you're not confined
Different.
to do one thing. Yeah. Cool. What about social or other things with school? My Braille set covers everything because yeah, so I'm an English major. I don't think I mentioned that. And
No, that's awesome.
that is all about writing and reading. Oh, thank you. I
Mm.
appreciate it. Yeah. So that's all about reading and writing. And so it's very handy. It just allows me to navigate everything that the professor me, but in a way that's accessible to most part, as long as it's in the correct file and extras and stuff like that. But I'm able to use that and also paired with my where I can connect through Bluetooth in my computer, where I can just access everything through Braille, which is helpful because back in the day, they would have these like typewriter like things called braillers that you would carry around and they were so heavy and you would write braille on the paper and then you'd have to have somebody transcribe it into print and it was just like whole process. So
Oh my
I'm so
goodness.
glad that the technology has gotten us to a point where I can literally just send somebody an email with my assignment and they can just read it and grade it without issue. Very helpful. That is amazing. I'd love to hear it. While we're talking about school, have there been any hurdles or big adjustments that you've had to overcome in going to school in like working with professors in groups or other things like that? You know what? Yes, now that you brought it up with math and science, because they're so visual and because they're so focused on spatial and especially with science, with labs, it's extremely visual and observational. That can be really hard. And I think it all depends on whether the professor or the teacher is willing to adapt and willing to some changes and be a little bit flexible with the way that they're
Mhm.
teaching it. And now that I'm in college, a lot of the responsibility falls on the accessibility center and not so much on the professor. So basically, the accessibility center is a group of people that um, go through and ask them like, "Hey, can you convert this file?" And then they would do all the work because at a college level, the professors aren't as much involved with that. If they want to be, they can
Yeah.
be, but it's not required.
Yeah.
But yeah, but in high school, I had some teachers that they would be like, "Just turn in whatever. I don't know how to adapt this." And
Oh my
I wouldn't
goodness.
really get out of I know. So I wouldn't really get anything out of the class because I was just like, okay, I guess I can't do lab or I can't learn this geometry. And so that was difficult. Uh, it's hard when professors or teachers, they don't really understand how to adapt and they sometimes aren't willing to understand. So I think that's
Yeah,
sometimes the difficulty crops up.
yeah, that's tricky.
I think it's just, I don't know, things always happen where you need to adapt something. Especially, I like to think that, I don't know why, but every time I take a test, like something was wrong. I have no idea why, but it can be difficult and it
Yeah.
requires flexibility from both sides.
While we're thinking
Mhm.
about high school, I have heard from other people, depending on where you go to school, it probably varies. But what was, yeah, your high school, middle school, elementary experience? Were you able to just be in a mainstream class? Did you have to advocate for yourself?
So for middle school and high school, I will say elementary school was a breeze. It was very easy. I had we call it a TVI that was lovely. And I would go to mainstream school, but then she would take me out maybe for an hour every day, like periods in middle school or high school in her room for a little while. And we would learn Braille. And then my other teachers like grammar and phonetics and things like that. Is that what we call it? I don't know, just language sounding
Yeah.
out words, that kind of thing. So, yeah, and so that was pretty easy. And it went into middle school and high school. For my TV, I actually had to move to be a kindergarten teacher. So I didn't have kind of that person like holding my hand and advocating for me. I went through 8 different TVIs in middle school, and it always
Oh
reminds
my.
me of Sound of Music, but how the kids have gone through 10 or 12 nannies. Like, it just reminded me of that.
Yes.
Like, it's happening, like, teachers. And so that was really hard. And it was for varying reasons. Like, sometimes they would, I don't know, they would get married or they would move schools or just things like that.
Yeah.
And so it left me on my own, to advocate for myself, try to prepare for college. And in high school, for whatever reason, there was just a lot of stress around me going to college. People would say, I touched on this earlier, would say, I don't think you are going to succeed in college. Like, it's not going to be a good place for you. They would give me like random and probably unsupported statistics about how few people who were blind would graduate from college. So there was so much stress on me where I'll need to do different things, different opinions, but none of them were actually like helping me and seeing what I wanted to do. And so I had a really good experience in the mainstream with my general education teachers, but the difficulty arose actually from teachers who were in the specialization helping blind people. And it was interesting. I didn't expect, I think a lot of people think it comes from like your actual regular teacher, but a lot of the time it was actually just a lot of pushback from mentors in the sighted people who were in the blind community. If that makes sense. Like who were
Yeah.
specialized.
Why do you think that is?
I think that I think that people who work in that community, they have, how do I word it? They just have a lot of opinions about how blind people to behave. And it's a marginalization, right? So it's a small group. And I don't know why that is, but I think it's our marginalized community. And people seem to think that they know all the answers and know what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And there's less pushback to that, if that makes
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
sense.
Okay. Let's talk about why accessibility is important.
Yeah. So I actually have a lot of passion about this. I recently, I don't know, like 2 years ago, read that changed my life. And it was called Disfigured. And it was basically about fairy tales, bizarrely, and how to disability. And how those stories have shaped our society into believing certain things about disabled people. And I just found that really validating because all my life I didn't really have anybody who knew what it was like. Obviously, my brother and I were really close, but I felt like I wasn't even allowed to say, hey, no, this isn't like I need more accessibility or inclusion. I was just talking about it. reading that
Yeah.
book made me realize like how important inclusion is and how it's important at the level of like one kid in college, but it's important on a bigger scale, the government having us in mind or us being in movies as like main characters and not just and just the little things that start
Yeah.
to pile up and so being able to reframe the way that society views us because a lot of the problem people don't really think disabled people that much. And they because it doesn't apply to them, right? Like it's not an urgent
Yeah.
issue in their own lives. And like I totally understand why people wouldn't think of it, but it is something that needs to be thought about and some that kind of needs to be brought to attention because even if it's not overtly harmful or trying to be, it can like the misconceptions that we see in daily lives. And that can cause us to not be well represented in almost every area in school, media, in like the way that the government visions. It just needs to be something that's more
Yeah.
thought about, I guess.
I think that's so important because I'm just even thinking about your life, and a lot of people are saying, "Oh my gosh, how can you do that?" Or you won't be able to do that. And for you, if you were just supported and given the resources, which you have a ton of resources, and there could be way more, right? But even right now, you're able to live alone and be successful in that way. But then also to be supported in saying, instead of you're never going to make it in college, being able to say you can make it in college. Think about all the other people that could be successful that have a disability. We can look at disability as really just being like the environment that you live in doesn't support the needs that you have. And so if everything was set up so that there, and we're trying to be better at this, right? But the curb cuts or other things, certain things wouldn't even be seen as a disability because it doesn't get in their way or they don't need another accessible resource. So if we as communities and neighborhoods and governments could create a world that's more accessible, think about how much more successful those that have other needs could be in our communities. So I think what you're doing is really important and I'm glad you're passionate about it. I think it's awesome. So
Thank
one other
you. I
thing,
appreciate
and no, you're okay. With like the tokenization in media, my little kids, I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they have recently they found this TV show on Disney. It's newer. And the main character, I can't remember the name of the show now, but he doesn't have an arm and he has like a robot extension on his hand that he does cool stuff with. This is like a toddler show. But
it.
one of the episodes, he talks about doing things his own way because the way that everyone else does it, he can't do it because he doesn't have a hand on one side. And so he figures out how to do these cool things in his own way. So now my little kids, like whenever they can't do what I'm doing, because if they want to cook with me, the table's too high or the knives are too sharp, they say, "It's okay, mom, I'll do it my own way." And so I have thought that we've gotten better with like portrayal of ability or disability in the media has improved dramatically to be able to hear my kids say, "Oh, I'm just going to do it my own way," and to not see someone else's disability per se as like a bad thing, but just, oh, they can do something in a different way. So I think we've gotten better.
No, I love that. That makes me happy because it wasn't necessarily something I had as a little kid. There were really stories. All I had
Yeah.
was like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is really not
Scary.
and they felt really brutal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that. I'm really, yeah. I teach a class at BYU where we talk about designing for inclusion. And I think, as I think about the tools and the things that you're using, I'm really curious about the people on the back end. If they have people that are blind designing those products and people with those disabilities helping design a lot of those things. Anyway, just a side note, I'm thinking about anything else with accessibility that you want to share that you're passionate about.
oh man, that's a good question. And I like that point because I think a lot of the time, out the ADA, all of those people at the front of that movement were disabled and they were fighting for a better world for themselves and for other people. And I think that's fallen away, whereas like people are now just adhering to the ADA standard, if people don't know about it, of having wheelchair accessible ramps, having, they're called truncated domes on the curbs that tell blind people when the road is. They look like Lego. I always call them that.
Yes.
But yeah, people will just do it like halfway or do it to check box, like how much it influences people. And so I think we need to shift our perspective from these ADA requirements as being another thing we have to do and like a minor annoyance to actually something that is incredibly impactful and important for people with disease, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What are some other things besides the what'd you call a truncated dome? Are there any other things that I'm sure a lot of people don't even know that's for? But if there's anything else that is built into our communities that we don't think about that really benefit you.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I don't think a lot of people know what it is for either. There's also the talking light that tells you when it's time. That's important. One that sometimes is braille signs, but they are important when they're used correctly.
Okay. Okay. Along so I asked earlier, what are some hurdles you had to overcome with school? Are there any other hurdles that you've had to overcome that you'd like to add to that?
Maybe you'll touch on this later, but you know how I've always loved doing plays and performing, and I've done maybe 13 or 14 plays, I think last I counted. And so I've done a lot of them. And it got
Mm.
to a point where I felt like I had trained a lot and gotten my like to what I was proud of and done all of these plays, and I still wasn't being cast. And it was really
Mm.
hard because I was seeing all my friends getting the lead. And I'm sure this is like a very common thing for most people who are in theater, but it felt like it was something extra because the directors were often like, they would actually tell me that just unwilling to like adapt and that it was just going to be too hard. And even if maybe times in like less obvious ways, they would just say that. And like, it was very hard because it didn't really control. It was like, you feel this way. It's not like I can change you. I've tried my best to get as
Yeah.
talented as I can, if that makes sense, or improve myself. And it's not working. And so I feel like that was definitely a point of powerlessness for me and still is, honestly, of just like,
How frustrating.
do things. But like some people just, I don't know, like the way that they see me, it doesn't allow for me to do those things. And so it's out of my hands, but it's also just something that affects me. So it's hard.
Yeah, that sounds really frustrating. And I've heard you sing. You have a beautiful voice.
Thank you.
So I'm curious with that, what are some of your dreams? Do you have some, you seem very driven to me. So I'm curious what your dreams are.
That's something, thank you. I think the biggest dreams now is to become an author. And basically, I love to write in general and I love stories and I've always loved stories. But something that is me to becoming an author and writing is that I said this earlier, but I always talk about it, that I feel like ability isn't represented in books very well. And when it is, it's not written by people who are disabled.
Okay, what are some blessings or privileges that come with being blind? A lot of times we talk about what are the hard hurdles that we have to overcome, and those are real, and let's talk about them. But I'm curious, what are some of the special things that you've had because of being blind?
Oh, I love this. And I love talking about the joy of it too, because there's so much of it. I think one of my favorite things about being blind is I feel like I to understand people minority groups fairly well and maybe better than other people because confined to the bias that can sometimes have appearance. And to say that all student people are like prejudiced in any way, but just sometimes it's a problem that happens where a snap decision, like what sort of person they are based on all manner of things. And maybe I judge people's voices or something like that. Pretty good at being able to not do that and just having a
That's cool.
perspective that's like less confined or and I think that's something that I've been trying to I don't know, just work on and remember because hopefully it can help it.
That's really cool. That is a very unique perspective to have. I love that. Okay, let's hear your silly one.
Okay. I would say I have pretty good hearing and obviously not like supernatural in any way, but I love just being able to hear really well and be able to tell. I can hear my mom from across the room and I can tell my siblings by like their breathing or their footsteps. And yeah, and I like to eavesdrop on conversation and just feel like that's so interesting. That's like very
You
entertaining
could be a spy.
for me.
Do you feel like that helps you with singing? Do you feel like that's given you an added like level to be able to increase your ability to sing?
Actually, so I'm so glad you asked. I think so. My family makes fun of me because I'm really picky about people on the radio. I'll be like, oh my gosh, they did not just sing that note or something like that. I like miss things musically. And I think I was always like that from since I was really little. And I'm not music, I mostly learn by ear. So I think that is definitely a big help.
Do you have competitions with your brother as to who can hear better?
My brother is in a league of his own. I think he has perfect pitch. He's so funny. We'll
Really?
just be sitting there and he'll be like, that snare drum is a little off. We're getting a little off key. And I'm like, so he's awesome.
That's right. Okay, tell us a little bit about what would you tell people? You have a community of people listening to you. What would you share with people that you would hope people would know about your lived experience that could help make us better?
Well, that's so sweet. I think the first thing to think about to encounter someone with a disability is that it's just something like that's a part of me. And so I'm a singer and I have brown hair and I'm the youngest of five and I'm blind. When all of those are true and
Yeah.
all of those hold equal weight. And so I think whenever you approach somebody, just remember that they're a person outside of their disability.
Yeah. We all have challenges. My challenge
Yeah.
maybe isn't like a parent from just meeting me for the first time, but when someone approaches me, the first thing that they don't ask about is my challenges necessarily. And so that you're saying the same thing. We all have challenges, and being blind is something that I navigate, but it's not the only piece of my world. Nor is it probably your only challenge, and everyone has lots of things that they're figuring out and navigating.
Yeah, exactly. I think when people do have, like you said, it's not something that you're going to ask them like first
Yeah.
or even extensively. I think I'll have people who come up to me and they are mostly interested in my blindness and they will just ask me like a bunch of questions about that. And it can feel a little bit invasive just because it's not taking into account that like you've just met me and I need to get to know you first. And so I would say, like, when
Yeah.
you ask questions of people, first, see if it can't be answered by Google or anything else. See if it's something that, is going to be, just think if somebody were to ask you a similar question, how that would make you. And then obviously you can really ask them and you can say, hey, like, how comfortable are you with me asking you questions? Then that opens the door for them to be like, but okay, let's just talk about our classes together or something like that. Because people have just
Yeah.
found that. And I think we're not all perfect. And it can sometimes be just a little bit tiring to answer a billion questions. And not to say that that's a bad thing, but just if you can find an answer to your question, you may find it like somewhere that's not somebody that you've just met, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Plus, you'd probably rather talk about other things for you, things you're passionate about or excited about. So, just like anyone else.
Oh, yeah. And then when I get to know somebody, I can talk about that. Or if it's something like this that's actually focused on it.
Yeah. Okay. When people meet you for the first time, generally in our social sphere, we give a handshake. What's your preferred way, or maybe in general, for someone that's blind to meet someone for the first time? Is there any like physical touch that you do appreciate, or like no? Like what would like a good interaction look like in the first meeting or
Good question. Yeah. I handshake, I would say the most important thing is to be really verbal and say, it helps if you know their name so that they're talking to you. So I probably wouldn't be sure. Like I wouldn't know if they were talking to me or somebody else. You know their name. Hi, Mia. Or you can maybe touch their shoulder or something. to tell them that you're talking to them. And then if you want, you
Mhm.
could say, hey, I'm reaching 5 or I'm reaching out for a handshake. And that will let them know so that your hand isn't just sticking into midair. Obviously, then they can say, they can meet you and shake your hand. And also, that is helpful is if you could say, announce yourself, be like, hi, it's Rachel, or hi, it's Johnny, or whoever, just for the first
Mhm.
few times, just because that way it helps to remember your voice. And sometimes it can be really hard, like in a crowded campus, if somebody says hi and like you can't hear them very well, it can be hard to know their voice. And so I think by
Yeah.
default, probably say, hey, it's so and so for the first few times, just because
Yeah.
that it helps. I can't count any times I don't know who somebody is. And I just have to be like, hey, random
How
person.
weird. Yeah. Was it easy to make friends for you your first semester?
Actually did. I had a lot of really cool people just to talk to. I think BYU is generally like a really friendly campus, but I think in general,
Yeah.
just meeting people is really fun. And walking on campus, I get a lot of that just explore people concerns if I'm okay or if I need. And so then I use that to
Mhm.
springboard into a friendship or just like a good conversation.
Yeah, you're so cool. Yeah, but when with small when little things like sorry, now I'm having a hard time. With little things like holding the door for you or so I've heard other people say, just make sure you always ask before you do things. Is there any advice there with this is again for like less of people you have a close relationship with. You're like on campus or you're at the grocery store and people see you just like you said and think, oh, maybe they need to see if you need help or anything. Do you appreciate that? What is your thought on that?
I do. I think it's really kind. But my advice, again, what you said, just ask. And if they say no, then like they say no. I just had one experience with a woman who, like, you don't know where you are. I'm going to help you. And grabbed my arm and started and like just walking with me. And I was like, I'm fine. So just wait for them to tell you because it is really kind. It's very kind to say, hey, if you need help or hey, I've got the door for you. I think everybody would say
Mhm.
that, even sighted people. Like it'd be kind to just ask
Yes,
somebody
no,
if they're okay.
totally.
But yeah, like just take them at their word and probably don't touch people they say that it's okay to. Maybe that's just a
Mm.
thing. But if somebody like I say, takes my arm and starts like pushing me somewhere, that's stressful.
Yeah, you're like, you're taking me off of my notes from like, getting to classes, and now I don't know where I am. Is there anything else that you feel like you would like to share with us that we maybe didn't touch on?
I think we touched on everything. I would say though, just like a parting thought, that we don't usually use the word ableism in society, but it is a word and it
Mm.
means discriminating against people based on their ability. And I think a lot of the time we have ignored this and not seen it as something that affects us. But I would just say keep your perspective open and just know that it does exist and it is something that people are discriminated against based on in jobs and in the government and in other things. And it is as we have to become aware of it in order to solve and so sure that it's a thing.
Yeah.
And then to know that even just like your own perspective shifting can make a difference. Even as you see disabled people as worthy of belonging and space in the world, that is an
Yeah.
enormous step toward inclusion. And I just think that as we shift our perspective, that will be mirrored in the world around us. And even if it's just a little thing, it is really impactful.
Really cool. I'm inspired by some of the
Oh,
things that you shared. I'm grateful that you would let us sit with you and hear your story. You're just wonderful.
thank you. I appreciate it so much. And even just like allowing disabled people voice in these kind of things is so wonderful. And I really appreciate it.